There is a truth that very few people dare to say out loud. The biggest problem with Bitcoin has never been its technology. It's not the price, the volatility, or the sensational media headlines either. The real problem lies in human psychology. Bitcoin is not as difficult to understand as people think. What's difficult is accepting a far more frightening possibility. Backhand index pointing right that the financial beliefs we've carried with us our entire lives might be wrong. When you talk about Bitcoin, you're not just introducing a new asset. You're unintentionally touching on very sensitive territory. You're questioning the US dollar, the currency the entire society places its trust in. You're questioning the Federal Reserve, the pillar of the US monetary system. You're questioning pensions, 401(k)s, bonds, the safe zones millions of American families rely on. And even deeper than that, you're questioning what their parents taught them about money. This is no longer a conversation about investing. It's a cognitive shock. And the truth is, backhand index pointing right, most people are not ready for that shock. That's why many Bitcoin believers make a serious mistake. They try to orange pill everyone around them. But speaking honestly, as a financial professional, this is not a moral issue, it's a strategic mistake. Trying to convince someone who isn't ready is the worst possible use of energy. It doesn't help them. And it certainly doesn't help you. Because Bitcoin doesn't win through debate. Bitcoin wins through time. Bitcoin wins through mathematics. And ultimately, Bitcoin wins through real-world economic pressure. After years of working with Americans, I've realized one very clear thing. People don't act because of knowledge. They act because of pain. People don't buy insurance because they understand risk. They buy insurance after they've had an accident. Bitcoin is no different. Inflation erodes cash. Banks collapse. Accounts get frozen. Governments print trillions of dollars. Backhand index pointing right pain is the true catalyst for awakening. And when you stop trying to convince others, something very interesting happens. The right people begin to find you on their own. No more shallow questions like, is Bitcoin a scam? Instead, you hear very different questions. How do I hold my own private keys? How do I escape systemic risk? Because in the end, Bitcoin doesn't need you to promote it. Backhand index pointing right Bitcoin only needs the moment when people are forced to rethink everything. And when that moment arrives, they won't look for a preacher. They'll look for living proof. After realizing that the problem isn't Bitcoin itself, but human psychology, I began to observe more closely how people react when Bitcoin enters a conversation. Very quickly, a repeating pattern emerged. In reality, when you talk about Bitcoin, you'll encounter 5 types of people. But only one type is truly worth your time. The first type lives entirely within their comfort zone. Their income isn't bad, but they spend almost everything. Credit cards always carry a balance. Savings accounts are nearly empty. They don't feel like there's a problem at all. To them, Bitcoin is just internet money, risky and unnecessary. These people don't lack information. They lack motivation. And without motivation, there is no change. The second type believes politics will fix everything. Economic trouble? Elect the right people. Inflation? Pass the right policies. Housing costs? Introduce new laws. When you say that Bitcoin removes the need to trust third parties, their belief system starts to collapse. Because if the system itself is the problem, then many past political arguments become meaningless. The third type sounds the smartest at first. Surface-level skeptics. They ask very reasonable questions. Will governments ban it? What about the environment? Could the network fail? But if you look closely, they're not seeking answers. They're looking for excuses to remain comfortable. Debating with them doesn't lead to understanding. It only leads to exhaustion. The fourth type is deeply skeptical. They don't trust governments, banks, or institutions. And eventually, they don't even trust mathematics. To them, Bitcoin could be some elaborate conspiracy. Here, the problem isn't a lack of knowledge. The problem is the absence of any shared foundation for dialogue. And then, there is the fifth type. These are people with a highly proactive mindset. Entrepreneurs. Engineers. People who read out of curiosity, not obligation. They already sense that something in the system isn't right, They just haven't connected all the dots yet. And interestingly, you don't need to convince them. You simply need to live according to what you believe. Because in finance, credibility doesn't come from words. It comes from behavior. When you don't panic during market crashes. When you're not stressed by inflation. When you don't chase every headline every day. Others notice that difference. And they begin to ask very different questions. The moment I stopped trying to convince everyone, everything changed. Truly curious people appeared. The question was no longer, is Bitcoin a scam? But, how do I hold my own assets? No longer is it too late. But, how do I reduce systemic risk? Bitcoin, ultimately, is a test of personal responsibility. It doesn't wait for CNBC's approval. It doesn't need government guarantees. It doesn't require permission from experts. And that is exactly why it makes most people uncomfortable. But history shows one thing very clearly. Bitcoin is always said to be too late. Too late at $100. Too late at $3,000. Too late at $60,000. And then once again, too late. Those who participate don't do so because someone convinced them. They do so because they accept responsibility for their own decisions. Bitcoin has no CEO. No marketing department. No investment fund artificially pumping it. It exists and grows because it solves a real problem, and that problem is becoming more severe over time. So instead of trying to speak to everyone, perhaps the better strategy is this. Become living proof. When they're ready, they'll find you. And when they do, they'll truly listen. There is a very common misunderstanding that I see repeated in almost every conversation about Bitcoin. People think Bitcoin needs better explanations. In reality, it doesn't. Bitcoin doesn't lack explanations. What it lacks is the right moment in each person's life. You can give someone all the best data, charts, books, and podcasts in the world. But if they still believe the current system will protect them, all that information simply passes by as noise. People don't change when they're given more knowledge. They change when their old beliefs begin to crack. And that's why in the United States, many people only start asking questions after real shocks. After the bank they trusted collapses. After their account is frozen due to an unreasonable dispute. After inflation causes wages to fall behind the cost of living. These moments don't appear on Twitter. They appear in everyday life. And they are what truly open the door to Bitcoin. When that door opens, the way they ask questions changes completely. They're no longer looking for reasons to dismiss it. They're looking for ways to protect themselves. And that's when the real conversation begins. Another interesting thing I've noticed, people who are ready for Bitcoin rarely ask, should I buy? They ask, how can I reduce my dependence on this system? For them, Bitcoin is no longer an investment. It's a structural choice. At that point, you don't need to convince them. You don't need to debate either. The only thing you need to do is share your own experience. How you store your assets, how you think about risk, and how you face the uncertainty of the modern financial world. Not as a teacher, but as someone who has walked a bit further down the path. This is also why I believe Bitcoin is a very strict test of personal responsibility. It gives you no one to blame. There's no intermediary to save you if you're careless. There's no institution guaranteeing your mistakes. That frightens many people. But for a few, that is precisely what makes it so compelling. These people understand one thing clearly. If you want financial sovereignty, you must accept the responsibility that comes with it. There are no shortcuts, no free insurance, and no expert who can decide for you. Bitcoin, therefore, is not for the masses immediately. It spreads slowly, but it spreads deeply. Not through advertising, but through experience. Not through promises, but through the fact that it continues to exist through every crisis cycle. And each time the traditional system breaks down, another group of people begins to see Bitcoin differently. If there's one thing I've learned after many years in finance, it's this. You cannot wake someone up before they're ready. But once they are awake, they will never sleep the same way again. And that's also why, instead of trying to speak louder or say more, the wisest strategy is knowing when to stay silent. Keep learning. Keep building. Keep living by the principles you believe are right. When the world grows louder, your calm will be the clearest signal of all. Finally, this is the most important thing I want you to take with you after this video. Bitcoin doesn't need you to defend it. It doesn't need you to argue on its behalf. And it certainly doesn't need you to go out and convince the whole world. Bitcoin has existed, grown, and matured through multiple crisis cycles without a CEO, without a marketing department, and without any central organization standing up to represent it. That is where its strength lies. It doesn't win because many people speak well of it. It wins because it continues to exist in a world that is becoming increasingly unstable. What Bitcoin truly does is not to change the system overnight. It changes the way people think about financial responsibility. It forces you to ask, who controls my money? Who actually bears the risk when the system breaks down? And if things go wrong, am I depending too much on things outside my control? Not everyone is ready to face those questions. And that is completely okay. Some people need more time. Some people need more experience. And some people need to feel enough pressure from inflation, from economic instability, from the very real limitations of the current system, before they begin to question it. It's not your job to speed that up. And it's not your responsibility to wake them up. Your job is to take care of your own position. Keep learning. Keep building understanding. Keep living with greater sovereignty in your financial decisions. Let your calm speak during chaotic times. Let the way you respond to inflation, volatility, and crises become your strongest answer. Because when someone is truly ready, they won't look for a preacher. They'll look for someone who has walked ahead and is still standing. And when that day comes, they won't ask you, is Bitcoin a good idea? They'll ask, how can I take more responsibility for my own financial future? If this video made you think differently, hit like, not for the algorithm, but because it helps this content reach people who are ready to listen. Subscribe to the channel if you want to continue having honest conversations. Quiet, not sensational, but focused on the true nature of money and the system. And I want to leave you with one final question. What moment made you start looking at money and the financial system differently? Share it in the comments. There's a good chance your story could be the missing piece someone else is looking for. Choose your conversations carefully. Choose your energy carefully. And remember, Bitcoin doesn't need you, but your financial responsibility needs you. I'll see you in the next video.